Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. In the Hokage booth of the Chunin exam arena, surrounded by the helpless, boisterous noise of the crowd around him, only Sarutobi Hiruzen, Sandaime Hokage of the village hidden in the leaves, found himself apart from the general feel. Of the rest of his citizens as the spectacle of the first match of the Chunin exam finals had played out before them. Slowly dragging his hands down his face, the old nin steeled his nerves and turned to face his opposite number from Suna, trying to make light of the situation. Hokage Dono. It wasn't often that Sarutobi was beaten to the punch, but these were far from usual circumstances as the veiled village leader pointed a slender finger at the victorious figure bounding back up the stairs to wait for his next fight after sportingly bowing to his opponent. Just remind me again, which of your genin was that? That was Uzumaki Naruto, Sarutobi intoned heavily, trying hard to quash the upwelling of pride in his as he saw his adopted grandson advance to the next round of the exams, Konoha's #1 surprising ninja and currently waging a one-genin war on Kono. Ha's diplomatic friendship with Suna and my blood pressure. I can only apologize. He fell silent as the other man raised a hand gently. No apologies necessary, Sarutobi Dono. He acted completely within the rules of the exam. In fact, I doubt we'll see a finer example of the ninja basics today. The boy confused, misdirected and drove his opponent up the wall before administering the coup de grace, a textbook example of a shinobi battle, and he used only one jutsu in the whole fight. True, though I have no idea where he learned a concealment jutsu that advanced. In fact, I know perfectly where he got it from. Grateful for his experience in thinking one thing while saying another, Sarutobi smiled at his guest at the same time as plotted a furious revenge against one of his students. T.S. Jiraiya, if you taught him that jutsu for the reasons I think you did, Minato will soon be having company in the Shinigami's belly. Still, it will be interesting to see if he can repeat the trick again. At that, the Kazekage laughed. Very true, even if another of my shinobi will be the target, though I must confess I doubt he would be able to hold his own against Gaara. The man broke off of a minute to pick his red-headed son out from the other competitors, a fond smile on his lips as he did so. He's grown so much, and finally has Suna's thanks and respect rather than its fear. Despite the veil covering his face, Sarutobi could almost see the sadness clouding his opposite number's face like oil poured on still water. The hardest decision I ever had to make came when he was born, and even now I still don't know if it was the right choice. I damned him to a childhood no father should have to see, let alone ask his son to bear. Sarutobi said nothing, merely placing a steadying hand on the younger man's shoulder as he too remembered the pain someone who loved for a Jinchuriki could feel. More than once the visions in his crystal ball had driven him to tears and sake. The world of ninja was one of deception, and in this field Sarutobi stood almost alone in his experience. Only the Sandaime of Iowa could possibly hold a candle to his years of experience. Even in such a cutthroat world though, the aged Kage could think of no finer deception than the one pulled by the man to his side. Knowing that Suna was much weakened at the end of the Third Great Shinobi War, the current Kazekage had made a carefully calculated gamble in sealing the Ikibi, the on-e-tailed Tanuki Shukaku of the desert, into his youngest son. The sealing had cost the life of the priest who had performed the sealing, though both mother and son had survived and the power of the Biju had been harnessed in the creation of the new Jinchuriki. That alone would have brought Sarutobi's grudging respect. Though distasteful to use a child in such a manner, he wasn't so blind as to see the necessity of the Kazekage's actions in such desperate times for his village. However, what the man had done next had been equally cruel and brilliant in equal measure. Though the seal had held perfectly and Gaara was mostly dominant over his prisoner, even going so far as to impress the Biju in his early life and for a semi-symbiotic relationship with it that led to his automatic sand defenses and mastery of the desert terrain, the Kazekage had spread rumors that the sealing had gone wrong, killing the boy's mother and turning his baby son into a monster. Sarutobi didn't presume to know the whole truth but knew that the Kazekage had remarried his wife in a private ceremony and kept his youngest son away from Suna as a whole, though his older siblings were still his family and messed with him like a normal little brother. Once Gaara was old enough to understand the situation, the cage had apparently sat his family down and asked them to perform a great sacrifice for Suna as a whole. Though the situation was much improved for the desert village, Suna was still the weakest of the 5 great nations, and its leader knew that Iwa still harbored grudges against the Sand for standing with the Leaf when the Yellow Flash had been alive. For that reason, until the next generation of Suna shinobi were battle-hardened and ready to fight in a war if need be, Gaara needed to act the part of a demon to ensure his village's safety. Though the cage was wounded that he needed to ask a young boy to take this burden, and tears were shed on all sides. The youngest Sabaku proved equal to the task, and the desert demon's prowess waxed strong. In fact, the heavy makeup he wore under his eyes to feign insomnia with the reasoning that Shukaku would devour his soul if he slept had been Gaara's idea and help reinforce his persona as a killer. His brother and sister, strong shinobi in their own right, had made up his team and allowed him to drop the mask around his family and sensei, as Baki was as close to the cage as his own right hand and the only non-family member to know how safely the Shukaku was bound, giving the boy some much needed respite from the burden of wearing a murderer's mask every day. On missions, Gaara was, or had been, a blood-crazed sociopath with his talk of mother and voices in his head, killing any opponent regardless of whether they surrendered or not unless his family could talk him out of his rage. Every time Sarutobi had met him, both on missions and in private, he had proven to be a little shy, and possibly a little cautious around people he didn't know, as his sand would automatically rear up at strangers until it got to know them, but apart from that he was as well-balanced a Jinchuriki as any Sarutobi had ever met or fought, save maybe Naruto. The cage's deception had been so complete, so astute, that even Orochimaru had been fooled and fallen head first into a trap that had, Sarutobi hoped, drained most of the poison from that dangerous snake's fangs. The Hokage had first gotten wind of his treacherous student's intents from Jiraiya, the spymaster informing him that he'd spotted Odo agents gaining audience with the cage, one of them bearing the cursed seal of the Hubby Sennin. Seeing the potential danger, Sarutobi had sent Son Goku himself, King Enma's son and the second most powerful of the ape summons, to petition the cage of his student's intentions. The news he received back was disturbing. Apparently Konoha's recent revenue increase had come at the cost of their allies. The Wind Daimyo, apparently distrustful of his own shinobi, had been siphoning off more mission to Konoha, leaving Suna's military to starve. Like the vulture he was, Orochimaru had seen this and sought to turn Suna against the Leaf for his own ends. In this, though, he was foiled by the foresight of 2 of the most experienced cages in the elemental nations, as Hokage and cage worked together to thrash out a deal that would both remove Orochimaru and force the Wind Daimyo to see the quality of his own forces. After correspondence and minor concessions from both sides, the basic plan had been formed. Konoha had kept taking the missions from Suna but kept the payments aside, while the cage became more frustrated with his lost business, listening to the honey Orochimaru poured into his ear. Eventually, after months of waiting, the trap had been sprung, as the cage agreed to meet the Snake Sage with a few bodyguards in attendance and plan the first stages of an alliance. However, when Orochimaru arrived, he found his schemes unraveled, his backup plans quickly crushed, mostly Latera LLY, by the Jinchuriki of the desert, and himself facing 2 cages and his one-time teammate. The battle that followed was spectacular, and it spoke highly of Orochimaru's skills that he was able to escape alive, though not entirely unscathed. While Sarutobi was sure he would be able to heal up his wounds at the hands of Enma's diamond staff form, the blow Jiraiya had caught him with had, in the Toad Sage's own words, busted a few of the snake's fangs. The seal had been derived from an idea Minato had drafted but, thanks to Kyuubi, never had time to finish. After its first field trial, however, Jiraiya was heard to grimly nod that it had worked as well as famous student's other great seal. It had immediately been entered into the Forbidden Scroll of Konoha as an S-ranked kinjutsu, as anything that could break a shinobi from any summoning contract they held was a powerful tool indeed. Once the Toad Sage had brushed his former comrade's arm and intoned the seal, Orochimaru had simultaneously lost his summons, all the techniques that relied on the snake contract, including the hidden shadow snake hand, and the Kusanagi sword, held in the belly of a snake he could no longer call upon. At this point the hubby had turned tail and fled, screaming his intentions for revenge and leaving his former minions to their fate. It was a fate Sarutobi had left with the Kazekage, and it hadn't been unmerciful, aside from the last Kagaya that he'd had to personally put down with Enma, as the boy had been fanatically devoted to Orochimaru and would die rather than surrender. The rest of the ND5 had been captured and Jiraiya had new samples of the cursed seal to study. After getting the prisoners back to Suna, an amusing relief from the battle in and of itself as the girl of the group continued to swear and curse until Gaara gagged her with some of his sand, stating he was getting a headache. The Toad Sage had worked night and day until, at last, the seal was understood and could be nullified properly. Last the Hokage had heard, the former Sound Four were starting to come to terms with what had happened, as the cursed seal apparently warped the perceptions of the people it was planted on, and were adapting to life in Suna, though the girl Tayuya was repeatedly making a nuisance of herself by going out of her way to try and get Gaara back for the indignity of being dragged through Suna's gates with a ball of hardened sand between her teeth. Young love, Sarutobi thought to himself, masking a smile as he recalled his own courtship in younger days. How quickly does it go from fighting in battle to fighting in bed? Well, if that does happen, Gaara deserves it. He's owed some happiness in his life now. Aside from that, Suna was reimbursed for the missions Konoha took in their stead. Orochimaru is now in hiding due to the loss of Oto's anonymity, and Suna now has the respect of the man who finances it. Though it perhaps is a blessing from Kami that the Wind Daimyo is absent today, seeing the boy Naruto had beaten finally trudge up the stairs to where his sister and younger brother were lending him a less than sympathetic ear to his moaning, Sarutobi permitted himself a slight smile at the irony of the boy everyone claimed was the dead last, beating a supposedly superior shinobi with little more than deception and a mean pranking streak, as that performance may have given him more doubts about his shinobi forces. XXX. Kankuro was feeling pumped up and ready for this, though he wouldn't be able to use his disguise trick with Karasu again since his opponent had seen it in the preliminaries. He'd seen the boy he was fighting, one Naruto if he remembered rightly, fight in the preliminaries and didn't think much of his performance, though he had to respect his opponent's chakra capacity if the number of cage bushins he could pop out was any indication. Still, if the other genin was hit by a single one of his poisoned weapons, this match was as good as his. The paralysis agent would freeze a man up in seconds, giving him an easy win. He kept his confident face on as the other genin skipped down the stairs, the ice-searing orange of his uniform almost reminding the puppeteer of the desert sand of his home as Naruto crossed the arena and beamed at the Fur-A. Uzumaki Naruto, future Hokage, is here and ready to go. The Junin simply coughed wetly again and turned to look at both nin before looking up to the Hokage's booth, waiting for the signal to start the match. While this happened, Kankuro noticed that the smile had dropped from his opponent's face and, seizing the advantage, laughed loudly, pointing at the diminutive nin. "What's the matter, kid?" he spoke tauntingly. "Scared of me? You should give up now and come back when you're out of nappies." The other boy seemed to flinch at the blow, and Kankuro gave himself a pat on the back as a ripple of approval raced around the crowd at his psychological attack. With any luck he'd be back in the stands and cheering on his siblings without even having to unwrap Karasu. "Of course I'm scared of you. You're the only guy I've met more perverted than either of my two teachers, and believe me, that's some accomplishment." That one hadn't been in the script. Before the puppeteer could reply, Naruto had carried on, holding up his fingers as he went along with a new East. "You tie yourself up like a mummy in public, walk around in a gimp suit in broad daylight, wear more makeup than your smoking hot sister, and you play with dolls. Man, those are some habits even Kakashi Sensei and Ero Sennin wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, and even worse, you've corrupted our little brother into wearing eyeshadow. What kind of freak are you?" Up in the stands, Gaara ran a finger under his eyes self-consciously. It wasn't his fault, or Konkuro's either for that matter, it was an essential service for his village. In the arena, Konkuro felt his face grow hot as he heard a couple of sniggers from the gantry, and with a flush he threw Karasu off his back, the bound puppet making a hollow wooden thump as it impacted in the tightly packed sand. That is not true, it's… What? You don't think your sister's smoking hot? Yes. No. She's my sister. Konkuro realized what the other boy was driving at and fought to keep himself from ripping the blonde brat limb from limb. It was a struggle that only got harder at Naruto's next words. After saying you wanted to see me in nappies, nothing about you would surprise me now. He's dead, he is going to beg me to kill him before I leave this arena. Konkuro said nothing, the breath all but boiling the air in front of him as he formed his battle strings, and Karasu unfolded itself from the wrappings as its master spoke in low, measured tones. Referee San, start the match please so I can make this brat eat his words. To his infuriation, said brat merely smirked and shrugged as he nodded at Hayate. Just as long as you make sure that's all. He tried to make me eat. Seeing and sensing confusion around him, Naruto made to deliver another cutting line. Just keep them off balance and go from there. Believe me, it's only going to get worse from here, buddy. Let's face it, that puppet doesn't look much like a girl. He left the rest unspoken, but the crowd understood as muffled, and in some cases not so muffled. Laughter began to rain down on them. Both, deciding that the puppeteer would be out for Naruto's hide and that it would probably be best if the bloodbath started during the exams rather than before it, Hayate brought his hand down at the same time he jumped backwards. Hajime. Shazam. Naruto threw something at the floor and a blinding light forced everyone to look away and cover their eyes. By the time the light faded, Konkuro and Karasu were alone in the center of the Colosseum. Naruto had vanished. He didn't attack when I was blinded. Idiot. As he blinked back his vision and set Karasu to guard him while he thought up a plan, the Tsunade smirked. He's too soft under that bluster. He won't kill. Now, let's track him down. Moving his puppet around, the eldest son of the Cage gathered his chakra before releasing it in a pulse. Kai. Nothing happened. Damn, strong genjutsu. Konkuro cursed as his enemy was still invisible. It looked like he'd be forced to reveal some of his puppet's area effect weapons after all. He didn't want to waste any more chakra. Okay then, he had a plan, now to make it happen while his opponent was still idle. Right, Karasu? Can't see him. Of course I can't. The puppet snapped moodily. You're the one with eyes and, Kami, help us, brains. Another spanner was thrown into Konkuro's mental gears as he registered who had spoken. With disbelieving eyes he looked up at the puppet in front of him, not fully processing what had happened. You, his voice trembled, you talked. Question mark quote. Thank you, Captain Obvious, it quipped back snippingly in a manner that Konkuro, with a distinctly sinking feeling, thought he recognized. Anything else you'd like me to do? In fact, the puppet seemed to consider, an impressive feat as Konkuro wasn't making it move at the time. Don't answer. That. I'm not voyeuristic. Trying to ignore the disembodied voice and the giggles it was generating from playing to the audience, the puppeteer stuck to his task of trying to root out the annoyance teasing him like this. Aw, shut up. He jerked his fingers and the wooden construct flitted about, a rain of senbon peppering the area behind him with no apparent success. I'm going to kill you and then laugh about it. There was another laugh, this time from Karasu. No, you mean I'm going to kill him, lazy puppeteer. The puppet groused even as the air around it became saturated in an evil-looking purple mist. Always the same. I do the work, he gets the credit. Kill the genin Karasu. Carry my lazy around Karasu. Bend over and think of Suna Karasu. Quote. There was sudden jerk on the puppet's strings that brought it to a complete halt as Konkuro, face red as he realized everyone was now laughing at him through his puppet's insinuations, lost sight of the antagonist he couldn't see in favor of the antagonist he could. Oi, that not true. Denying your issues doesn't make them go away, the puppet countered snidely. the mastermind behind this audacious scheme, taking a second to make sure he wasn't about to give the game away by laughing at the jokes he was putting into the puppet's mouth. And don't try to say it's for maintenance either. Your body fluids do not count as a suitable lubricant for my interior joints. It might have been a long-term mission to suspend the threat of war over Suna, but never before had it been in more jeopardy. Watching his brother getting beaten down in a one-sided argument with his own puppet was driving Gaara to the brink of laughing out loud. This wasn't something a demon should be doing, though his father had recently said that he should start to let go of that persona now as, following the implosion of the mist into bloody civil war, Suna was no longer the weakest of the hidden villages, but he still wasn't entirely convinced this would be the best way to tell the world he was free of his supposedly mad mother. However, as the dialogue continued, he was forced to bite down on his tongue and watch Tamari keel out of her seat, face bright red and tears streaming down her face. He realized he might not have a choice in the matter in a couple of minutes. Kankuro for his part was flabbergasted, and not just because it was getting harder by the second not to blow his own puppet sky high with a few explosive tags. Subconsciously he knew he was being led a merry dance and was deep into the other ninja's trap, but the second he tried to break free, the MNED nuisance would trigger another snare that would land him right back at square one. Where are you, you son of a bitch? The Suna nin howled aloud at the end of his tether, not noticing the killing intent being leveled at him for a small, feral-looking section of the crowd. I'm going to rip you apart and show you the true meaning of pain. As he breathed heavily and scanned the arena again, still not sure how his opponent was keeping himself so well hidden, he heard a sickeningly familiar snigger. Oh, like that's going to scare him? A threat like that from the guy who defines morning wood as wake up and check for splinters. Why can't you use a blow-up like everyone else? Are you allergic to latex or something? Quote, shut up. Make me. It was the closest Kankuro had ever come to hurling Karasu away from him. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It was a fight, not a comedy routine, and I didn't hear you telling me to shut up when you were inspecting my kunai holster with your special kunai. All but breathing fire by this point, Kankuro yanked his weapon around brutally and fired off a rain of kunai randomly around the fighting area, hitting nothing but sand as the howls of the audience crashed in his ears. None of this is true. You got that right. He was so surprised with his pseudo-opponent agreeing with him that he stopped mid-sentence. A fatal mistake. You couldn't get your rocks off there. You had to use the Senbon launcher. At that final insult, Kankuro snapped like a dry twig. Screaming in rage, the puppeteer hurled the disobedient puppet around, firing off weapons like they were going out of fashion in the vain hope of flushing out his hidden quarry. Come out and fight me, you coward. You're nothing if all you can do is taunt. Someone cleared their throat nearby, but Kankuro was too far gone in his rage to realize it. You're not a shinobi, you're a joke, a freak and a dead last. The throat was cleared again, this time louder, but still the Suna nin ignored it. You're not fit to be a chunin, you don't have the guts or the skills to lead a squad and kill. He paused for a second, breath heaving in his lungs and not recognizing the audience suddenly falling silent, focusing all his attention on Karasu as it spoke again. You tell him, boss, but there's one thing you forgot to mention, that he is. What? A sudden impact pitched the puppeteer forwards on his face, Karasu going limp as his concentration broke and the chakra strings animating it faltered and flickered from existence. Dry sand and dust filled the Suna nin's nose as something grabbed his hood and yanked his head up. He struggled and tried to kick the assailant off his back, but froze as he felt a shock of cold steel under his throat, listening to a voice in his ear that was suddenly bereft of the teasing lilt Karas. You had used. He's behind you, Naruto informed him before looking up at Hayate. Junin-san, from here I could kill him at any time. I claim victory. Hayate inspected the scene for a minute before nodding, coughing and raising his hand. Shosha, Uzumaki Naruto. The audience, which had been stunned into silence as the orange boy had shimmered back into visibility and stalked the back of his enraged opponent, broke out into spontaneous applause that Naruto lapped up eagerly. It was an amazing feeling to hear so many people cheering for him. He raised his head and gave a wild grin, only to hear a sudden whisper from below. Hey, Naruto. Hearing his prisoner talking, the Jinchuriki leant over to listen as the painted boy hung his head. Just do it, will you? You beat me and I never got close. I can't look at the other Suna shinobi now, so just give me. I'll give you a clout around the ears if you finish that sentence, the genin growled, taking the kunai away from Konkuro's throat in case the other ninja got any ideas. You lost a fight but not your life. Be grateful and learn from it. Oh, and just to make it up to you, twisting around as much as he was able to, the puppeteer saw an evil smirk on the blonde boy's face as he leant down and whispered something that only Konkuro could hear. It was a simple enough promise, but one that blew all the cobwebs and thoughts of seppuku right out of the older nin's head and dragged a matching evil smile to his lips. That smile was still in place as the puppeteer finished gathering all his spent weapons and reloaded them into his now merciful. Why silent puppet? As he stepped back up the stairs to the competitor's box, it dimmed a little as he saw Naruto being virtually mugged by the other Konoha nins, the tattooed boy he'd fought in the preliminaries in particular, laughing and bowing in thanks to the prankster that he hadn't fought that way a month ago. Konkuro shrugged and walked away to beside the rest of his team and family, nodding as he accepted some half-apologetic smiles from the contingent of nins that were starting to recover from their laughing fits. Slumping into his seat, he massaged his eyes with a free hand and grunted to the person sitting next to him without looking. Go ahead. I know what's going to happen next. And happen it did. Temari and, to his surprise, Gaara as well burst out laughing again, though the Aikibi container was far more reconstrained in his mirth compared to his sister. The wind mistress was actively bumping her forehead from the tip of her fan as she rocked forwards and back like a leaf in a gale of laughter, thumping her brother on the shoulder. So, Sora, hey, she broke off to wipe her eyes, grin on her face a mile wide. Bu, but that was something else. I never, he's a ventriloquist. To use that on a puppety here, oh, that's going down in Suna history. She broke down again, taking advantage of the impromptu lull in the matches that had followed, Naruto half killing the audience with his one-liners and Karasu's unwitting assistance. Konkuro merely massaged his forehead and looked over at her, face set in a basilisk stare. You know, Mari, there's only one thing that makes this whole thing just about bearable for me right now. Guess what that is? Shaking her head in a way that made her ponytails shake, Temari waited in anticipation for her younger brother's answer, though the grin his painted face split into when he spoke next punctured some of the mirthful mood that had surrounded her. He's up against you next round. Temari went pale. During the recess after all the first round matches, Sarutobi stretched back in his chair and fanned himself gently with the Hokage's hat, wincing as something in his back let him know its displeasure with the sudden movement in the form of a sharp grinding pain and dull snap. Kami, I'm too old for this. I need to get Jiraiya on the case of tracking down my replacement as soon as these exams are over, after I finish raking him over the coals for teaching Naruto the YS of the super pervert. Still, on the bright side, it was a nice day to be outside and the exams had been a great success so far, though Sarutobi was forced to mask a smile as a part of his conscience reminded him that there was at least one genin candidate who was probably wishing he hadn't got out of bed that morning. Masking his humor with a contemplative look, the Sandame looked across to his opposite number from Suna. The younger man likewise sat back in his chair with his fingers steepled under his chin. A Rio for your thoughts, Casecage Dono. Startled, the leader of Suna's military strength jerked upright before relaxing again, nodding as he spoke carefully. Hi Hokage Dono, the matches have gone well so far. 2 of Suna's nins are through and at least one of them should reach Chunin, if not high. Grr. I agree. Gaara-san's strength is far beyond that of any of the other candidates here, the old man agreed diplomatically, though if he and Naruto decided to go all out I wouldn't want to be anywhere near the danger zone. The way he handled the Hyuga prodigy was truly inspired. Neji never got close and he is, despite his attitude, a formidable nin. His chivalry, Despite himself, Sarutobi couldn't help but smirk as the cage shuddered silently, though the veil he wore concealed any potential blush. Also 1H. I am many friends, especially from Team 8. XXX. That much was certainly true. Everyone in the stands knew the match was over the second the Tsunade had managed to wrap the Hyuga up in his sand after disrupting the so-called perfect defense of the prodigy by forcing the sand under his spinning feet to shift unexpectedly. Most of the audience had expected Neji to meet a messy end at that point, but what had happened next had shocked everyone there, even the Jinchuriki's own father. Poor Hyuga Hinata had nearly fainted dead away when Gaara had shouted for her loud enough for the entire stadium to hear. Lady Hinata-san, this fool's fate is in your hands. At once all eyes had swiveled to the girl Neji had brutalized in the preliminary rounds, and she let out an eep, almost missing the rest of the Tsunade's proclamation as she sought to hide behind Kiba. Do you want me to kill him or spare him for what he did to you? It took a moment of virtual hyperventilation and Akamaru licking her hand reassuringly for her to gather the tiny scraps of courage left in her body and reply in a whispering shout that, regardless of its quiet nature, everyone in the stadium heard. Anyo, Gaara-san, please don't kill him. Trembling slightly, she looked down at the restrained form of her cousin, lavender eyes radiating concern and possibly pity despite the wounds he had inflicted upon her not a month earlier. He has been hurt by the past, more than anyone could know. The red-headed Suna Jinchuriki nodded before looking forwards again, skillfully manipulating the sand around Neji's body to force the older Hyuga to lock eyes with him as he spoke again. Your life was spared by your weakling of a cousin, because of her kind words and only her kind words. You still have a fate in this world. He raising his hand forwards, eyes suddenly becoming teal jade stones and tone expressionless as he commanded his battle sand once more, remember that when you wake up. XXX. That girl was always very kind. Never did have the heart to kill from what I hear. Sarutobi reminisced as he absent-mindedly pulled his pipe from a pocket of his robe and lit it. I must remember to see if the medical corps would be interested in teaching a Hyuga, or at least, teaching Hinata. I agree. The sudden noise almost made the Sandame jump. He hadn't realized he was speaking out loud. The main branch heir, she is different from most Hyuga I have met. From what I know of the clan, most main branch members would have had Gaara crush his opponent like a grape in that situation, assuming they didn't use that controlling seal on their opponent first. It was a fair point. The Hokage was forced to concede that at any time during the inter-clan bout Hinata could have forced her cousin to submit via use of the caged bird seal, though the fact that she had not spoke much of her courage in the aged nin's eyes. I agree, and it was both kind of her to ask Gaara to spare him and noble of Gaara to ask, though did he have to break Neji's arms before the bout ended? The cage looked over as Sarutobi shrugged. I only ask because the council will probably moan if I don. They must protect their geniuses, after all. Considering this for a moment, the other man shrugged. Gaara hates bullies, and they were clean breaks. He should be back in duty in less than a month, he stated dismissively, privately agreeing with the actions of his youngest son as the Urag. And Hyuga's actions in the preliminary round, against his own flesh and blood no less, had sickened him. Though my son was very impressed by that Hyuga's teammate, no one I know of has ever broken out of the sand coffin before, or landed a hit on him without the use of chakra in a duel. The Hokage chuckled. Yes, Rock Lee is well on his way to becoming the Leaf's latest taijutsu master in time, and that he can open so many of the celestial gates so young bodes well for him. I think he will prove his nindo, he can become a great ninja without chakra. And his loyalty to his team and his sensei's word is commendable. The cage agreed, remembering being forced to shield his eyes during the preliminaries as Gaara's technique had suddenly exploded everywhere, forced away from the body of its victim as Lee opened his first gate before forfeiting. Immediately afterwards, in respect to his teacher's wishes, I promised Guy Sensei not to open the gates except to protect a precious person. It would be unythful of me to use them just to attempt promotion. That will and 5 of the gates in reserve. He will make Chunin, I assume. Oh, most definitely, Sarutobi confirmed with a nod of his head. Though Lee hadn't progressed to the finals, what the genin weren't told was that every stage of the competition was graded. Technically, a genin could be failed at the first stage due to the actions of his teammates but still get promoted if a specific branch of the village's ninja took interest and accepted his performance, though I imagine the council's going to pitch a fit when they realize the Uchiha didn't make the grade. True, but the Aburame was perhaps his worst match-up, the Cage said fairly. I was quite surprised his coup of techniques was as small as it was. Has his Sharingan only recently awoken? I'm not entirely sure when he was able to access it, but I know his sensei has enough experience with that eye to train it well enough. Sarutobi waited until the Cage was able to put the pieces together, speaking only when the other man visibly jolted with surprise. Kakashi is not just the NER of all his jutsus, he is the master of most of them. Unless he copies a technique he cannot use for some reason, he will train himself relentlessly until the new jutsu is second nature to him. He must have set Sasuke the same example. Either that or he tried spying on someone else's training session and got caught. He shrugged as his guest raised an eyebrow. It happened a few times before the Uchiha tragedy. It was not tolerated then and will certainly not be tolerated now. The Cage appeared to consider this for a moment before letting his opinion be known. A sensible precaution, both for the Uchiha and the village. No shinobi likes his hard work being stolen after all. Still, in Sasuke's case I doubt the latter would come to pass. He apologized to his teacher for accidentally stealing his jutsu after all. XXX. Junin-san. As with all Aburame, Shino's voice was cool and logical as he held out a hand to control the swarm buzzing around his opponent. From here I could drain the chakra from my opponent, and I claim victory. Hayate looked over at the beleaguered Uchiha and, seeing the raven nod shallowly, raised his hand and called the match. Shosha. Aburame Shino. As expected, the crowd was rather quiet at this supposed upset, though the ninja in the crowd reviewing the battle were nodding with the verdict. Shino's strategy had been all but perfect as he had isolated the one weakness of Kaiden jutsus. The user had to breathe in prior to using them. By having a single insect flying around Sasuke's head and threatening to fly into his mouth every time he looked to take a big breath of air, the silent nin had shut down a large amount of Sasuke's offense and, after skillfully forcing the Uchiha to move and using some of his swarm to burrow underground in a delayed trap, had managed to drown his opponent in the midst of his swarm. Calling in his symbiotes once more, the Aburame bowed towards the Hokage's box while Hayate turned towards where Sasuke stood scowling in defeat but still resigned to it and asked the traditional question for defeated nin. Who? At this Sasuke brightened somewhat. He always did enjoy a chance to show off regardless of the circumstances. Who was a chance for a nin beaten during a selection exam to give examples of any jutsus they knew that they weren't able to use in the tournament, making up for nin who were forced to withdraw or beaten by opponents who had an inherent advantage over them. In this case Sasuke knew it was his big shot for promotion and attacked it with a will, hurling fire and flame around the arena at a terrifying rate. The demonstration had lasted over 2 minutes before the Uchiha came to a halt in the center of the ring, breathing slightly heavily but still upright. When he didn't move for a few seconds, Hayate spoke once more after coughing again. Finished. Sasuke-san. The boy didn't respond for a moment. In fact, to Hayate he looked to be deep in thought, though before the Junin could call time on his performance he turned and called into the crowd. I have one more jutsu, though. Kakashi-sensei. The copy nin looked over his book as his student shouted up to him. I copied this one from you inadvertently but have been studying in my own time to make it work as it suits my affinities. I hope you find me worthy of it. With that, the genin bowed to his teacher and flexed one arm, concentrating hard. For a moment nothing happened before. With a recognizable crack and distinctive noise, a small ball of lightning flickered to life in his palm, Sasuke roaring the name of his technique. As he thrust his arm forwards and allowed the lightning chakra to disperse. Chidori. Silence met his announcement for a second before thunderous applause rained down from the civilians present. Once more the last Uchiha had surpassed the norm for his age by knowing such a high-level technique. Sasuke fell to one knee, heaving for breath like he'd just run a marathon, though he recovered enough to wave off Hayate's offer of assistance and climb back to his feet and bow to the village leaders unaided. Knowing he'd done all he could and the rest was out of his hands, Sasuke walked slowly towards the stands and levered himself up the stairs, nodding politely at the well-wishers offering him luck and appreciation on the way. On reaching the seating area, the Uchiha Raven collapsed into the nearest seat, flexing his hand experimentally and grimacing, though it didn't burn anymore. Trying to use that jutsu still made his hand cramp like there was no tomorrow. That was awesome, Sasuke-kun. There were at least 2 more fireballs per shot than the last time I saw you. As expected, Sakura spoke to him first, though her tone was no longer the blind squealing of someone hopelessly infatuated with another person. Since they had become Team 7, all 3 genin on the squad had matured, Sakura perhaps more than the others, as she was now offering a critique of his skills. Next time though, try breathing through your nose, it's harder to see. I'll keep it in mind, he commented offhandedly before turning to see a grinning Naruto and his sensei smiling with his one visible eye. Sorry I missed your match, Naruto, but it's easier than you think to get lost on the road of life. The blonde grinned before clapping his teammate on the shoulder. Ah, if Kakashi-sensei wasn't late for anything but his own funeral, the Anbu would be checking for an imposter. Anyway, I'm sure the others will fill you in, he mentioned with a gleam in his eye that made even Sasuke nervous. Looking like that, he either won by a fluke or by a mile, and right now I'm banking on a mile. Still, what was the last jutsu you used again? At this point, Kakashi interjected. Chidori, my one personal jutsu and a high B ranked assassination technique, he rolled a stern but not unkind eye. Tawa. RDS, the genius of his team, not something that should be taught to a genin, but I'm proud you didn't go overboard with the training on it. Sasuke shook his head. Never again. One lesson I didn't need the Sharingan to learn, the Raven confirmed, the memory of being held by both Sakura and Naruto. For nearly half a day at their training ground after the mental blocks he had built up over the years had shattered under the combined weight of the memories of the murder of his entire family, years of relentless training without so much as a single day's break, and the visual knowledge of Naruto, Hidobi in class dead last, learning a skill faster than he, the clan genius and rookie of the year, could pick up, haunting him even to this day. In that moment he'd completely snapped over the simplest little thing, seeing Naruto pitch a tent faster than he could. The memories immediately afterwards were a bit of a blur, but as far as he could recall he'd gone from trying dementedly to kill the blonde with a kunai and his own bare hands to sobbing into his shoulder as the pressure of his own expectations finally ground him into the dirt and drove tears from his onyx eyes. The smell of his friend's blood heavy in his nose as the orange jumpsuit and the shoulder of Sakura's dress soaked up his crying. I changed that day, we all did. It was a truth that Sasuke couldn't doubt, as since that time he'd felt, almost lighter, as though vengeance against Itachi was more a long-term goal, rather than something to be pursued regardless of the cost to both himself and others. While still proud of his achievements, he was also able to enjoy the skill of his team and the achievements of others. The memory of tying the ribbon Sakura had worn in her bout against Ino into her hair, and her grateful smile as he arranged her hair around his artwork, was somehow more important than the urge to master a new jutsu, or show off his Sharingan to wow the civilians. Similarly, Naruto had been more than willing to share his trump card jutsu, the Kage Bushin, with both his teammates once they had Kakashi's approval and supervision once they asked him how it worked, rather than demand or try to coerce him into revealing his secrets. The jump-suited boy was still the master of his jutsu though, as Sasuke could only manage a single Kage Bushin at best, and Sakura couldn't even do that until her reserves increased or she had help from soldier pills, but such a team ethos and camaraderie was helping him, and the others, far more than isolated training ever had. As he heard Naruto's name being called once more, Sasuke slapped his teammate on the shoulder and smirked. It's up to you now, Naruto. Go knock them dead. The grin he knew so well flashed into place, and at that point Sasuke knew, instinctively knew, he and the rest the audience were in for a real bout this time. Just watch me knock their socks off. Believe it, I do believe it, just like I believe you'll be Hokage someday, just as long as you can help me out with bringing Itachi to book before you do it. Seeing his smaller teammate vault down the stairs, Sasuke stretched out before looking over his shoulder to his other teammate, wondering why she looked so stricken at his parting words. So, what did we miss? Quote, XXX. The Nara will have to make Chunin, given his results on all 3 stages of the exam, the Hokage stated before chuckling, that I'm sure will upset him. He'll have even less of an excuse to slack off without his team to pick up the slack. I agree. I never thought I'd meet the nin who could give Shikaku-san a run for his money in the laziness stakes, but his son has the potential. The Cage agreed, having met the soon-to-be Chunin's father on a couple of occasions both on and off the battlefield. Hopefully his mother will be able to motivate him enough to move into his own apartment at least. Sarutobi muttered under his breath before clearing his throat. Still, your daughter Cage dono. She appears to have leadership potential when her youngest brother is absent, and her wind affinity must be approaching mast. Ah, you flatter both me and her Hokage dono, the other man chortled, waving off the older man's comments as though they were a cloud of flies, though perhaps that is not Tamari-chan's fault. Her first match gave her all the advantages. I will leave it to her next match to see if she has earned her vest yet. Oh yes. Realizing that it had all boiled down to this and knowing he'd run out of wriggle room, Sarutobi braced himself to seize the bull by the horns, or, more appropriately, the fox by the tail. True, but the last match, Uzumaki Naruto, Konoha's most surprising ninja, and with good reason, the Cage intoned, folding his arms as he did so, seemingly deep in thought. Even had Kankuro won, I would not have pushed for his promotion. Between Gaara and Tamari, he's had no experience in a leadership role. But Naruto's strategy. He fell silent for a moment before looking across. The saying in Suna is that genius and idiocy differ only in success. Even now I confess I'm not sure what camp to put him in. You and everyone else in the hidden leaf, Sarutobi informed him, inwardly cringing as he realized the time was almost upon them to see what mischief his adopted grandson was going to cook up next. Please Kami, if you can hear an old man's prayer, please let the Cage keep his good mood until the end of these exams. I really don't need a diplomatic incident on my desk before the day is out. Having mentally said his prayer, the Hokage paused for a second to ensure all his guests were seated comfortably before nodding and raising a hand to Hayate. The proctor bowed at the signal and called up to the contestants' booth. Sabaku no Tamari and Uzumaki Naruto to the floor please. XXX. Despite her outward composure, Tamari felt a cold chill run right through her at the summons, and Kankuro's expectantly evil grin wasn't helping matters any as whipped open her fan and glided gracefully down to the arena. If there was one consolation to getting caught by that lazy bum, she clenched her teeth at the memory of the cold, alien sensation that had flooded her body as Shikamaru's shadow had merged with her own, trapping her completely and putting her at his mercy. No one in Suna had been able to outthink her to that extent before, and she realized, belatedly, how sharp the mind hidden behind that uncaring exterior actually was. It was that I assumed he was going to have try and put this Gaki down rather than me. In fact, I'll bet this W. As one of the reasons he forfeited in the first place. It all made sense now, and Tamari felt her heart sink. If Shikamaru had known, or at least guessed, at what Naruto was capable of and decided it was too troublesome to even try and fight him, where would that leave her against the orange-clad nin? Who was now standing across from her, smiling brightly as he looked around and shot her a thumbs up. Give him nothing. Despite his cheesy attitude, Tamari remained stone-faced, half listening as the proctor explained the rules again. Nay, Tamari-chan, the name almost made her slip up, but she wrestled the blush down. No one in Suna had ever called her Chan. too afraid of her father and little brother for such familiarity, but it seemed Naruto either knew no fear or had no sense. Something on your mind? She blinked for a minute before smirking and hefting her battle fan over her shoulder. Yes, thinking of all the ways I'm going to stomp you into the ground before this match is over. Oh, right, the boy appeared to be disappointed before suddenly shrugging it off and smiling again. Well, as long as you're stomping my face I won't mind. He left in a second, just long enough for his opponent to look confused, before going for the jugular. At least that way I'd get a glimpse of heaven before ending up in hell. Tamari didn't have a chance of holding it at that one, and a blush spread over her cheeks as she choked in equal parts anger and outrage. Quick as the proverbial creature sealed in his belly, the Konoha Jinchuriki was onto it and not letting go. "Aw, what's the matter, Tamari-chan? You weren't thinking about some boy back at home, were you?" Just somehow instinctively knowing he'd take and spin her silence as a yes, Tamari was forced to run as much damage control as she could get her hands on and pray just wait for the chance to SNA the little Gaki in half when the match started. Ha! As if, she tossed one of her ponytail back over her shoulder, giving the best haughty glare as she could. Never yet met the man that could come close to keeping up with me. Good. That shut him up. Breathing a silent sigh of relief, the kunoichi prepared herself for a war only to be brought crashing back down to earth by his infuriating voice once more. But why was he bowing in apology? "Oh, I see. I understand, and I'm sorry if my earlier comments offended you." He straightened up before suddenly looking towards the gantry and calling up in a cheerful voice, "Tenten-chan, looks like you have an admirer down here." There was a sudden outburst of snickering at this point, as well as a sudden surprised gasp from one particular bun-haired kunoichi in the crowd, before the Tsunade wrestled back the initiative. "I'm not interested in women, you little Gaki." She drew herself upright again, ready to deliver a line of her own, only for Naruto to sneak in and get the drop on her. But the way you swept her out the air, just as she fainted." He clasped his hands dramatically in front of him, face a beatific expression of appreciative grace as her selled the preliminary match, seeing once more the Tsunade sweep Konoha's unconscious weapons mistress from the air with the body of her war fan. So noble, so romantic. "What? You think I should have impaled her on her own weapon stash?" Temari's colder voice pierced his ideas cruelly, her face curled into a derisive expression of scorn. "I didn't think you leaf nins were that callous." To her surprise, Naruto seemed to stare at her, blinking, and she gloried in the sensation of wrong-footing the sharp-tongued shinobi. "Now just start the match so I can bury him properly and my life shall be." That train of thought hit the buffer as she saw his eyes light up and was overcome with a sudden feeling that she'd just handed him something on a plate. "What you impale your girlfriends with is entirely your business, though I must say," he paused for just an instant, just long enough for most of the audience to get the joke and start pitching in with their laughter, before finishing the line, "I think the Tetsubo might be asking certain things to stretch a little too far. XXX. That was it. Kankuro was helplessly gone as he watched his sister splutter at her opponent's latest insinuation. Somehow, being beaten by the leaf nin didn't seem like such a massive problem now he was observing someone else getting the same treatment. Wiping his eyes before they could run and ruin his war paint, the puppeteer looked over at the rest of his last opponent's team and promptly redoubled his laughter at their looks. The black-haired boy had a hand over his face and appeared to be muttering under his breath. Their sensei had the book eye. And his hand a little closer to his face than was necessary to ensure easy reading while the girl was leaning over the back of her seat, looking for someone. Seeing the cherry blossom perk up and curious despite himself, Kankuro casually channeled a sliver of chakra to his ears to listen in his sakura. Bowed to the kunoichi the puppeteer recognized as being Tenten, the girl Tamari had rolled over in the preliminaries. "Tenten-san, I apologize on the behalf of my Baka teammate and I promise you." "Apologize for what?" Hearing the voice, the bun-headed girl looked up and revealed her red face and wet eyes to be due to tears of laughter rather than humiliation. "I had this before off dad until I could prove Neji was actually a guy." "Go Naruto." The last part was a shout directed to the floor, a sentiment echoed by the tattooed boy who had been the dead last's opponent in the preliminaries. She said it. Go get her, bud. Leaning back in his seat, Kiba reviewed the last minute or so and found himself chuckling again. Out of all the clans of Konoha, the Inuzuka had a bodiest sense of humor, and he could almost hear the others of his clan who had attended laughing from where he was sat, least of all his mother and sister. When I get home tonight, I'm going to burn a ton of incense, get down on my knees and thank E. Very Kami in existence. He didn't try to pull this crap in the preliminaries. Right now a fart seems tame compared to this. You got that right. Choji chipped in, offering a bag of crisps that Kiba immediately dove his hand into, fishing out a couple of crisps to share with Akamaru. I'm sure GL. I didn't square off against him. It'd only take one F word to drive me up the wall. Anyo. Both boys looked over to see Hinata poking her fingers together, posture hunched but voice stronger that Kiba could remember it being for a while, and Naruto-kun would not say things to hurt people. Hehe, makes fun of them, but that's all. Both boys shared a look, gathering the attention of the others in their teams, before Ino spoke up, flipping her shortened hair over her shoulder. Fun or not, I'm going to give him a piece of my mind when he drags his sorry butt back up here, the youngest. Yamanaka declared, looking annoyed as she saw Hayate raise his hand. You don't say things like that to Kunoichi and hope to get away with it. All girls together, right, Hinata? Kurenai-sensei. Talk and watch, Ino. It's going down now, Kiba informed her, the other genin quickly dropping into their seats as both fighters jumped backwards from each other, though a second later a grin appeared on the Inuzuka's fang features. Though, while we're on the subject, who up for a bit of a bet? XXX. Tamari sprang backwards, all senses straining to try and catch a hint of what her opponent was planning for his next move. When it looked like he too was contemplating the same problem, the Wind Mistress whipped her fan forwards quickly. The technique had no real power in it, just enough to ruffle the younger nin's bright blonde hair, but the intent was there along with the message she delivered with an arrogant sneer. You can't pull that stunt that worked on my brother, she told him, snapping her fan open to emphasize the point. Doesn't matter what stone you crawl under, I'll just blow it, and you, away. Tamari-chan. She was beginning to hate that name, she realized, casually deflecting a brace of thrown kunai with the steel edge of her weapon. You blew me away the first time I saw you. He's flirting with me, in the middle of a battle. I'll kick his so hard his grandfather won't sit down for a week. The age-old memories of less than savory treatment from other male nins, at least before she had pinned them to the nearest wall for their derogatory comments, made her vision flash red, and with a snarl she swung her fan around, a lot more venom in her blow this time. That's it, kid. I'm going straight to the third moon on you, whined Cutter. The technique kicked up a storm of dust from the ground, but Tamari had a suspicion Naruto was too slippery to get caught with an attack had obvious and kept her senses alert. As she felt a chakra flare off to her left but slightly behind her, right where those kunai went, he switched with them, and spun, only to find herself facing not one but a baker's dozen of opponents, all making hand signs with grim faces as their ringleader out solidly. 3 moons, is that it? Take this, shit. With no time to dodge and nothing convenient within line of sight to switch with, Tamari crouched and raised her fan, channeling chakra through it to make the weapon nigh unbreakable, though she lost a line of sight to her target, Uzumaki. Naruto's secret technique. A dozen deadly moons. Tamari involuntarily flinched, but no impact came. She waited a split second before, detecting no chakra being used and hearing the sudden silence, punctuated only by a couple of sudden barks of laughers from some people in the crowd. She peeked over the roof of her fan only to gawk as she found herself staring down the barrel of a 12-bum salute. XXX. Unfortunately, as Naruto and his clones had been facing the competitor's box just prior to 12 of them dropping their trousers, the rest of his year group had been caught in the crossfire. As a result of that oversight, Team 8 were left trying to rouse Hinata from her sudden dead faint, though they were forced to agree with Kiba's observation that the smile on the sleeping girl's face was almost too cute to ruin by shaking her awake. Most of the other guys in the audience were WLING with laughter and catcalling the cheeky shinobi. The kunoichi present were silently plotting ways to make the Uzumaki's imminent beating, castration and possible murder look like an accident, and Team 7 were currently wishing for the earth to open and swallow them whole. Babaki-sensei, hunched over clutching his juddering stomach as he was Gaara, had to force himself to stand upright and address his sensei over the sprawled form of his brother, Kankuro having to fight hard to breathe at the minute. Your girlfriend's dignity is under attack, shouldn't you do so, Ing, to protect her innocent eyes? Bah! The older nin chuckled back. The idea that the eldest Suna sibling had a crush on their instructor was the in-joke of their team, birthed when a 6-year-old Tamari had blushed bright red as the then handsome Junin had complimented the kimono she was wearing. Ing, and was still running strong even now, she can take care of herself. Besides, as a feminine shriek of rage echoed up to the galley, Baki was forced to mask a smirk as Kankuro howled with laughter again, tears pouring from his eyes. Right now all she's got is plenty of indignity. But dignity? He shook his head, recognizing a kind of demented genius at work against his student. Not after that nin gets through with her. XXX. It was like the first time she'd seen the aftermath of Gaara's desert burial. It was horrible, but she couldn't tear her eye away from the unedifying spectacle in front of her. She was locked in place by the sight of so many rear ends facing her way, so much so that it was only when one of the clones looked under his arm, flashed a brilliant grin and spoke that the spell was broken. What's wrong, Tamari-chan? Said clone gave a wiggle, making her feel sick, like what you see. That was it. With a roar she whipped the fan around and a split second later 12 of the Narutos burst into smoke, the last one of the unlucky number scrambling to safety and distracting her follow-up attack by dint of a couple of shuriken forcing her to jump aside, not taking her eyes off her opponent this time. Ah, that was mean, Tsunade. Some of the girls at the academy said I had a cute butt. Naruto had to hide his self-satisfied grin as he rolled out the way of another concenter. Aided wind blast. The last bit was a bare-faced lie, but she didn't need to know that. Everything was all going according to plan. You could have spared my pride at least. That'll be the only thing I spare. His opponent shot back, using her fan to vault backwards as he ran up the arena wall and kicked off. She thought she had him when her wind blast knocked his launched kunai from the air, but gnashed her teeth in frustration as he popped a shadow clone out in midair to throw him clear of the danger zone. Everything else you've got is going to die when I get my hands on it. Hey, all you need to do is ask and you can get your hands all over me. He is going to die. I cannot let a nin this damn aggravating live. It's my civic duty to shinobi everywhere to put him down. Tamari was forced to repress a shudder as Naruto put his hands behind his head before running them over his jumpsuit suggestively, though, fair must be fair overall. I gave you a free show of the goods, I reckon. Quote. Die. Realizing what he was after this time, Tamari decided to end the farce. Her fan opened to its fullest extent, she whipped her body in a full circle, pouring chakra into the air and sending out a rain of wind daggers. There is nowhere for her opponent to run. She could see the fear in his eyes. He vanished. He switched with something. Looking around the entire arena, Tamari gripped her fan close and tried to hide her breathing. The last move had cost a lot of chakra. But where did he go? It was only when she heard a characteristic poofing noise above her that she looked up and gasped, along with some of the audience that had seen her opponent's latest strategy. Naruto was in the air and falling, but he was falling under control. He had a cage bushin underneath him and was riding its shoulders to the ground. Every time the journey picked up a bit too much speed, he merely jumped off, let the bushin dispel and conjured another one under his feet. Damn, I need more time. She knew while he was in the air he was in her element, but she didn't have enough chakra immediately to hand to use a technique. Instead she took a breather as the jump-suited shinobi made one last ride and, with a theatrical flourish, 6 of him landed on the floor together. And gave a victory pose. Mizuki-sensei always said I was a shower of a shinobi, one of them stated, shrugging with a grin. Guess he was right in the end. The grin dropped from his face like a stone, however, as his opponent, rested from her last attack, stood tall again. And he was, Tamari informed him, hoping to make him as angry as he had made her. How the hell did a midget prankster like you graduate? You've not laid a hand on me and I'll scythe you down before any of those clones get close. Dead last, she spat the title like a curse. Don't make me laugh, why? O'er a disgrace to dead lasts the world over. Nailed him. At once all the clones dispelled, leaving only the original standing there with a murderous look on his face. Tamari clenched her fan tightly shut, the odds now back in her favor as she'd taken away his ability to strategize. Dead last am I, he said coldly before cracking his fingers. Kakashi-sensei, thanks for the inspiration. You can put this down as the 1001st jutsu you copied. I'll lay a hand on you, Tamari-chan, and more besides. He crouched as though ready to sprint. His opponent let her fan hang low, ready to whip it up at a second's notice and dash his headlong charge to ruin and hopefully a coma. Come on, little boy, just run it defenseless, weak little me like the headstrong little lemming you are, and I'm in the final. Konoha Ultimate Taijutsu Technique Number 2. With those words, he vanished. There were no hand signs, no smoke, and no object appeared in his place. The disappearance was so sudden Tamari almost swung regardless, thinking he'd upped his speed like that green spandex-wearing freak from the preliminaries had. Before she could even think about what had happened, a voice suddenly bellowed in her ear. Eternity of pleasure. The voice had made her jump involuntarily. Probably the worst thing she could have possibly done, as 2 chakra-laden hands suddenly rushed towards their now exposed target, impacting with a loud slap before giving a very firm squeeze. XXX. Up in the stands, Kakashi was virtually bouncing with pride on the inside as the Suna Kunoichi was catapulted away from his students below the belt strike, though for his own safety he hid it, and his usual book, behind a facade of indifferent. With so many of the Kunoichi around him now out for blood after Naruto's latest move, this wasn't a safe place to be a pervert. I've created a monster, he muttered under his breath before suddenly breaking out a sweat as the killing intent of several genin and 1 junin sens sought to pin him to the wall. I'd just like to point out that technique was absolutely nothing to do with me, unfortunately. The last word slipped out involuntarily and Kakashi found the killing intent doubling, as he tried to talk himself out of getting staked out in the forest for the ants. Gaara found himself at a bit of a crossroads and leant over to ask his brother a question. Kankuro, the puppeteer, looked up and wiped his running war paint again. He knew it was ruined, but right now he didn't care, as watching Tamari, the big sister who used to beat him up for even looking at another girl with a twinkle in his eye, get her rear end slapped and grabbed was too deliciously ironic for him to do anything but laugh. Yeah, I'm confused. Seeing his brother raise an eyebrow, he elaborated, half of me wants to shake Uzumaki's hand for doing that to Tamari, the other half wants to rip his arms off for molesting our sister. What should I do? Well, for a start, win your next match and meet him in the finals. Mary's already lost this, she just doesn't know it yet, the puppeteer told him after thinking for a minute. As for the other bit, how about a compromise? Gaara raised an eyebrow, listening to his grinning brother rip an arm off, then shake his other hand. The Aikibi Jinchuriki considered this for a minute before smiling in kind. I can live with that, and I'm sure he will too when I'm through with him. XXX. A man's temper is like cup ramen, red hot after 3 minutes, but stone cold 3 minutes after that, Naruto mused as he watched his opponent flip away from him, using the tip of her fan to cartwheel away from his attack. A woman's temper, on the other hand, is like the ramen Tenchi Gigi serves, it must be simmered before it can be brought to the boil. Right now though, seeing Tamari come to a stop and bring her murderous gaze up to meet his face, the Kyuubi container slapped the proper, awestruck expression on his face as he finished his internal monologue. Time to put a bit more oil of the fire. Perfect. He breathed noisily, expression awestruck as he gazed as his hands, pert, firm and not a hint of cellulite. I'll never wash these hands again. Though really to Mari Heim, she was oh so close. If the next comment didn't break her, the one after it certainly would, he thought as he quirked an eyebrow at his foe, noticing how white the knuckles were as she gripped her battle fan almost tight enough to dent the steel. Granny pants at your age. Bingo. There wasn't a scream as he'd been expecting, but if the number of attacks heading his way was any indication, the Suna princess was rather upset with him at this point. However, as he ducked another attack and used a second sealess body replacement to avoid the follow-up, he decided just to be sure he was going to have to bring out the big guns to make sure his grand finale could work properly. With that in mind, he ran away from the kunoichi, dodging left and right with a few summoned shadow clones to swap placed with to make sure her attacks missed, throwing a few barbs over his shoulder to make sure she drew deep on her chakra reserves. Tamari-chan, don't be like that, you're a beautiful person, you don't need clothes like that to help you at all. He broke off to swap places with the nearest clone, grateful that he dodged that attack as he guessed that a blade of wind there would probably have put a damper on his eventual plan of getting a family with Sakura-chan. You just don't know how wonderful you are. Here, after throwing a glance over his shoulder as seeing the girl breathing like a racehorse, he realized this was the perfect time for his penultimate strategy and raised his voice for everyone to hear. Let me show you what I mean. Realizing what his surrogate grandson was talking about, the Hokage groaned, slapped a hand over his eyes and tried to think of a way he could try to talk the other village leader out of demanding Naruto's head on a pike before these exams were over. There was a sudden explosion of smoke, quite a feat as none of Naruto's previous techniques had used them during summoning. Even the cage bushin he'd used had been smokeless, just appearing from thin air. This time, as the smoke cleared, everyone in the audience gaped at the two Temaris now facing each other in the ring, each identical to the last detail, save one. The Temari that stood where Naruto had been was completely, save for a few wisps of strategically placed cloud. XXX. Yes, Kiba leapt up and punched the air as Naruto came through for him. I owe you one, buddy. Sorry, big man, pay up. He reached a clawed hand forwards and, grudgingly, Choji slapped a fresh bag of crisps into his open palm. Kiba grinned and made to look at the rotund ninja's teammate, only for Ino to fold her arms thunderously. That doesn't count. It's not Naruto, she stated, pointing at Naruto's girl form without looking at said henge. She's got too many ponytails. It's close enough, the dog Nin argued, flexing his fingers, after looking around and seeing she was going to get no support from her team, or sensei for that matter, Asuma being too preoccupied with trying to stop Kurenai throwing her most potent genjutsu at the hanged ninja to help his student. She huffed and slapped a 20 ryo bill into his hand. Pleasure doing business with you, suckers. Kiba smirked as he pocketed the note and opened the crisps, offering them around his team before laying one on the seat for Akamaru. Lesson 1 when dealing with Naruto. He doesn't think inside the box, outside the box or on the box. He's unique and you just can't predict him. Ain't that the truth? Another voice broke in, Kankuro seeking a distraction from the sight of his sister, disrobed in such a manner, forget dropped on his head, he must have been thrown out the window at birth to end up that screwed up. Tamari will kill him for this, if not in the match then after it. Kiba chuckled, offering his crisps forwards as Sakura, face as pink as her hair, walked over to them, unable to watch any more. And if she doesn't I will, she declared, thrusting her hand into the open bag and shoveling the crisps into her mouth. I don't believe him sometimes, what made him pull that technique, and in front of the cage, with his daughter for Cammy's sake. I just pray he's got a sense of humor or Team 7's going to be a man down by the end of the day, not that I'd shed a tear over his gravestone after this. Kankuro chuckled, helping himself a couple more crisps as he watched his real sister, crimson if not puce if the face, pull back her fan for one last attack. He should have. I wouldn't ask for his death and Mari'll get over it when this is over. He's a nice enough guy. Didn't kill me when I asked him to. That's Naruto for you, even if he doesn't mean to. He always makes you feel better in the quote. It was a sentence Sakura never finished. Along with the bag of crisps that went uneaten, by humans at least, Akamaru ate well while everyone else was distracted, as they fell from Kiba's numb hand as he, along with the rest of the audience, was taken completely aback as Naruto wrapped up the tch. XXX. See, you've got a wonderful body Tamari-chan, Naruto said, holding his hands down as he looked up and down the body he'd hanged into. You just need to flaunt it a bit. Ah. Seeing the potential attack coming, the henge waved a hand forwards. Don't do it, you'll blow the smoke away. Unfortunately, Tamari either didn't care or was too angry to think about it as she prepared her most devastating attack, one of her summoned weasels already in her fan and ready to be launched at her opponent. She snapped the weapon open ready to let fly, when she saw, too late, the gleam of triumph in her body double's eye. Suddenly the weapon was gone, snatched from her hands, and sudden pressure was on her wrists. As the world tilted around her and orange filled her vision, a glimpse from the corner of her eye told her what had happened. Somehow, Naruto had switched places with her fan in the middle of her using her technique. Her own momentum worked against her, the smaller nin managing to roll her over his hip in a throw, though one of his knees under her shoulder blades stopped her tumbling to the floor. His free hand, the one not around her wrist, gripped the back of her neck under her hair as she reached for her kuna. Eye pouch, mouth still open in a scream of defiance, only for her to look into the face of her attacker and realize with a horrible jolt of foreboding what his plan had been all along. The realization flooded her, paralyzing all her ability to think and react. By the time she thought to even close her mouth, it was far too late. Silence fell like a shroud over the entire arena, the only noise coming from the two figures wrestling in the center of the ring as Tamari fought to try and muscle her way out of the situation, though her struggles weakened as seconds ticked by. A horrible sort of certainty settled in the minds of everyone present. Surely this would have to end soon, if only for one of the two partners to breathe, but it didn't look like happening any time in the near future. The quiet dragged on, pregnant and heavy with potential, until at last it was pierced by the single extending digit of an Inuzuka genin who was repelled and impressed in equal measure at his friend's performance. He's a machine. XXX. He could probably have swept the indecent exposure under the table as an albeit unusual battle strategy, and he could even have had a game go at bowing and scraping an excuse for the molestation that had taken place, but now, seeing Naruto perform an impromptu tonsillectomy on the Kazekage's daughter in front of all the visiting dignitaries, all Sarutobi could do was close his eyes and wonder how many kami he'd pissed off in his previous life for it to come to this. I was not aware, Hokage Dono. Despite everything, the Kazekage's tone was light, almost airy and certain. Why not the tone of voice one would expect from a father forced to watch his eldest daughter being ravaged in front of him, that Konoha taught its genin advanced seduction techniques. No, but I know who would, and I know where he is as well. Sarutobi was not the professor for nothing. He already had that problem in hand and was looking forwards to getting the memories back when the beating ended. Until then, though, all he could do was try and smile his way through this mess. It does not, but Naruto is an unusual case. So it would seem, the other village leader commented dryly, looking down on the spectacle with an inscrutable expression on his face. The fact he appears to be able to breathe without the aid of his lungs alone would make him a valuable village ass. The Hokage could merely smile wanly at the humor and wait for two things to happen. He needed his favorite genin to break his lip lock with the Sand Princess, and he needed his shadow clone to find and beat Jiraiya to within a half-inch of his life. XXX. The upper tier of the Colosseum of the Hidden Leaf Village was mostly deserted as many of the potential guests had not arrived. However, despite appearances, it was not completely without habitation, though any casual observers may have been a little disconcerted at being unable to see the source of the giggling that seemed to come from somewhere on an empty row of seats. Oh, this is priceless, this is gold, hidden behind the cloaking jutsu only his teammate had even been able to breach, and that was only after repeated exposure to the jutsu, not that he'd ever let Tsunade find that out. Jiraiya was writing double time and almost aglow with pride as he watched his godson score with one of the hottest kunoichi at this tournament. His latest novel was all but writing itself. The brave competitor fights against his heroine, a fierce battle of hate and love colliding until, unable to be ear the passion, they consummate their brawling love on the bloodied Sanaa. Precious little could interrupt one of the super pervert's novel planning monologues, but that precious little did not include the sudden grip that clamped around his left ear. Managing a shaky grin, the Gamma Sennin turned as much as he was able to see his sensei staring down at him with a thunderous look that plainly stated, "Your testicles are in peril if you don't answer my questions truthfully." Hello sensei, please remember my ears aren't detachable. Yet, the older man's clone informed him, twisting even harder to ensure he had his student's full attention. Naruto. Your cloaking jutsu. Explain. Now. He asked me to teach him it. I swear to the kami. Jiraiya all but shrieked the last part as Sarutobi's hand inched towards his kunai pouch. Look, it went smooth as silk for the first part. Kakashi took him to Ebisu. He got his chakra control halfway decent and then we met. He signed the contract after I knocked Ebisu out, but then things changed a bit. Seeing his teacher think about this, Jiraiya took a chance and pulled his ear out of the danger zone, bringing a hand to the side. F his head as he did so. The brat's a lot smarter than than anyone gives him credit for. He told me to my face that summoning won't be any good in the Chunin exams except against maybe the Aburame, and he wasn't likely to face Shino at all. In the end we made a deal. If he summoned a toad I'd teach him whatever he asked for the rest of the month. It took him 2 days sensei, too. Summoning was a low Junin level skill, though mostly that was due to the chakra drain of the technique. Still, to manage it in such a small time frame was nothing short of miraculous, though this is the boy that learnt Kage Bushin in a night. I see, the Sarutobi clone said, folding his arms before taking a seat next to his pupil. So what did you teach him, and did the toads accept him? Of course, never a doubt about that, though he hasn't been introduced to Bunta yet. That'll happen when we track down your successor, the toad sage informed him before starting to tick things off on his fingers. But summoning, my cloaking jutsu, apart from that we just really practices what he already knew until he's perfect at it. Henge, body switch, shadow clone, he can do them all without seals, words or smoke if he wants to. Though, the white-haired Mon's face went grim for a minute and his tone was stony as he faced his old mentor again. He has stumbled on the perfect assassination technique now. You saw it just then, but it's so simple I don't think even Naruto realizes what he's got yet. What do you mean, Jiraiya-kun? The pervert leant down to examine his notes for a minute, flicking through his pad until his finger stopped under a particular entry, the Etern. Ity of pleasure. No, not the slap, what he did before that. Seeing the Hokage trying to work out what he was driving at, Jiraiya put him out of his misery. Sensei, there was nothing to replace himself with behind the girl. He body switched with air. Sarutobi went very still and very quiet for a moment. When he turned to face his student again, his voice was nothing more than a dry croak. Hiroshин. No, it's not summoning and he can't chain them as quickly as Minato could. Jiraiya had to quash that rumor as quickly as it had sprung up. Naruto was smart in ways his former student hadn't been, but he had yet to learn the intricacies of seal work. But it's still a nasty skill for anyone to have, never mind a genin. A genin not for much longer if I have any say in the matter, the clone promised, idly cursing when it realized it couldn't find a pipe in its robes. Still, you've given me much to think of, Jiraiya, and just for the record, if I even suspect Naruto is involved or mentioned in your next release, IWILL permanently ban the sale of Ika within Konoha. The Toad Sage went white and nodded. He knew Sarutobi could and would do such a thing as the Hokage had the latest volumes delivered direct from the printers. Naruto was the character in one of your books, he doesn't need to be in any more. XXX. With a sudden smack and a push away, Naruto broke his lip lock and scooted backwards. Luckily, Temari's thick hair had hidden his left hand as it had been around the back of her neck, pumping chakra into the muscles around her jaw, preventing her biting his tongue out. He was no Hyuga, but he knew the rough location of those tenketsu and had chakra to burn. Throw enough mud at the wall and some of it would stick eventually. He allowed himself a smile as he pushed himself to his feet, seeing the effect of his handiwork already apparent as his opponent swung around drunkenly to stare at him. Tamari tried to focus on her now arch nemesis, but everything was shifting, moving up and down and destroying her focus. Wah, you do to me. It was as far as she got before the darkness rushed up to claim her and she collapsed into unconsciousness. Phew, just quick enough. When he'd seen her go to collapse, he'd rushed to get to the right place and had just managed it, sliding his arms around the taller girl's shoulders and midsection to stop her breaking her nose on the arena floor. Turning to face Hayate, who was viewing the Suna Kunoichi with concern, Naruto shrugged as much as he was able to. Spat a sleeping pill down her throat. What? Seeing the Junin's disbelieving look, Naruto grew affronted. That wasn't for pleasure, you know. Well, not even he could hold back a blush. As he recalled that he might have held the kiss for a little longer than was strictly necessary to ensure Tamari swallowed the medicine he'd held under his tongue for the whole match, not all of it anyway. Seeing this, and realizing the Kunoichi was truly gone and asleep, Hayate raised his hand. Shosha, Uzumaki Naruto. At those words the orange-clad genin sagged for a minute, just one more match to go. Before hefting Tamari in his arms and slowly turning her over to carry her bridal style. It wasn't that easy, she was a fair bit taller than him, but he eventually managed it and began to pace towards the exit of the arena, not hearing the cheering from the rafters as much this time round as he behave. The sleeping face of the girl he'd just defeated. Sleep well, Tsunade, he breathed as he ascended the steps, shaking his head at the medic nins that approached him. The pill was fast-acting once it hit the stomach, but it wore off in less than quarter of an hour, and 5 of that at least had already gone. All Tamari needed was a few minutes sleep and a drink of water when she woke up. Still, explaining this to her brothers might not be all that easy, and that was assuming. He winced as he felt the killing intent from halfway up the stairs. The other Kunoichi didn't rend him asunder the second he walked into the box. Oh well. No going back now, and I've always been a fast healer. With that, he took his life in his hands and poked a cautious toe over the threshold, Tamari still comatose in his arms. Hey. Even he quailed as every female pair of eyes homed onto him like anko onto fresh genin blood. Hi guys, guess I squeaked it, huh? No one said anything to either damn or redeem him, and Naruto felt the cold sweat start to trickle down the back of his neck before, with agonizing slowness. Kankuro walked over slowly. Great, he's going to be really happy that I tongue wrestled his sister. Hopefully Sasuke will avenge my death. And stood before him, face blank. Naruto offered a weak smile and wordlessly extended his arms, and the prisoner in them. You not only you humiliated my sister in front of an entire village of people, and knocked her out without her laying a hand on you. When you put it like that, it really does sound bad, doesn't it? Naruto flinched as the older genin spoke and took his sister off his hands. It's official then, you are a kami. Obviously. Naruto wasn't the only one confused by this. I've been bugging Mari for years to get a boyfriend. Maybe that way she'll get off my back and onto his, the painted boy explained, turning away and leaving Naruto, with no brighter ideas at the minute, to follow in his footsteps. This at least should prove there are some men in the world as strong, or at least as sneaky, as she is. Though not many sneakier than you. Naruto suddenly froze as a hand fell on his shoulder and he looked around to see the hard, red eyes of Kurenai boring into him. Was that necessary, Naruto? Gomen Kurenai-sensei, the boy mumbled apologetically, rubbing the back of his head in response to hard tone. I guess that must have looked bad and wound you up, right? Yes it did. Kunoichi have too. The Junin was entirely ready to give Kakashi's student the same lecture she'd given hers after Shino had politely informed her that her taijutsu skills were not quite Junin level, but was C. Udoff when Naruto stood taller and looked her square in the eye. In that case, You're already dead, he said from over her shoulder. As everyone blinked at the shadow clone that had appeared behind the bandaged Junin, kunai placed against her spine, the original darted out of reach of T. He aggrieved teacher and shook himself down. I don't care if you're a shinobi, kunoichi, Junin, Chunin, Kage, Biju or Kami himself, if you're my enemy I will do whatever it takes to win and beat you down. If I have to drop my pants as a distraction I will, if I have to slash my wrist so I can spray blood in your eyes and blind you I will. I'm a ninja damn it, there is no such thing as a fair fight when we're involved, even in training. Because out there, out on a mission, he looked at Kurenai and the other kunoichi, his eyes lingering on each of their faces as he smiled darkly, an expression that truly didn't belong on his bewhiskered face. The only thing that differentiates a woman from a man to the enemy is what they can do to you. If they catch you and I will do anything, and I mean anything, to make sure that doesn't happen to me and Nin on my squad. Having said his piece, Naruto flopped into the nearest available seat and looked around, stopping when he met the unblinking stare of Gaara. Seeing this, his normal smile broke over his face and he called over. Gaara-san, Shino. Both Nin looked over at him as looked fearfully over at where Tamari had been propped up in a seat by her brother. Good luck in your match, but please make it quick. That pill only lasts about another 10 or so minutes and I need to be back in the arena before it wears off. I'd like to be out of fire country by then but even I can't pull off a shunshin that far. There was a scattering of laughter at this comment, more so when Kankuro chipped in his Ryo's worth. Yeah, and I need you back here pretty soon as well Gaara. I fully intend to make the most of my divine right to tease her after this but I'll need your shield to survive it. At this, Gaara smiled as he folded his arms, preparing to flicker into the arena. I'm an insomniac Kankuro, that doesn't mean I'm insane. Before his brother could comment he was gone, leaving the other nin to snap his fingers and curse. Damn, I don't suppose anyone else wants to stand in as a convenient barricade. No, ah well. He shrugged and steeled himself for a beating in the knowledge it was going to be worth it. Someone's going to get hurt here, he said half to himself as his unresponsive sister shifted in her seat, obviously fighting an orange oni in her dreams. Just my luck it's probably going to be me.